Rachel, and I'm here to do my final April 2018 AM reading update. This is my weekly video where I talk about what I've been reading or attempting to read and hoping to read soon. So first and foremost, I did indeed finally finish The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer, huzzah! And I no longer have the physical copy with me because I had to return it to the library for all the people in line in the holds list. So yeah, I think this was a really strong book. You know, it's one of those books that deals with a lot of thematic elements, and a lot of it is incredibly topical. Like Wolitzer sort of delves into the last two American presidents without actually naming them, but talking about their influence, as it were. And the major backdrop of this novel has to do with feminism, and particularly the ways that feminism was advocated and practiced in activist circles, like in the 70s versus today, and an intergenerational shift and fissures between them. And indeed, I've read a couple of reviews that talk about how this is very much a white feminism type of book, and I think it's a little unfortunate. I think I get very wary when people expect novels to be didactic. I think this is a novel that's very much about believable characters, and characters who are flawed, characters who don't have all the right answers laid out at their feet, and I think Wolitzer puts her characters through the ringers and makes sure to showcase how choices aren't easy, and that the world is a complicated place, and that's always something that I can get behind. And her characters are incredibly multifaceted, I think. Wolitzer deals particularly with Greer Kadetsky and Faith Frank, who, by the way, I kind of feel like I want to switch their names around because I know so many kids today who are named things like Faith and Harmony, whereas Greer seems decidedly 1960s or something. But anyway, Greer and Faith are the sort of mentor-mentee relationship. Faith is a second-wave feminist who speaks at Greer's college when she's starting to find her voice, her activist voice, and later Greer goes to work for her, and there's ups and downs again with the ways of practicing feminism out in feminist activism out in the world between the two of them. But the story also does go into Greer's roommate Z, who is also an activist and ends up on a different path, and Greer's boyfriend Corey, who is a promising student, and then a tragedy happens in his life that uproots and uprails his trajectory. And that's sort of an interesting thing about this novel, I think, because I think Corey's life would have been interesting even if it had gone unabated by this tragedy, which was sort of out of left field, as it were. And it would have been interesting to see the clashes and the give and takes between him and Greer if his life weren't so altered. I mean, it isn't, this out of left field tragedy isn't completely unbelievable, and so ergo interesting things and believable things happen to the character. But it's something that I think about too, that his life would have been so much different if it weren't for an external force, really. And then Z really fascinated me because she goes into gender politics and identity politics, and how to see yourself, and she's a lesbian who ultimately defines herself more as queer. She's not exactly female presenting, although she isn't anti-feminine, and she just has to navigate that world, and it just comes together in such a fascinating way. And meanwhile, you know, there's other stuff going on in her life too. And then Greer herself is pretty interesting. I mean, she has a strange upbringing with her parents who are sort of absent, and she's sort of had to take care of herself, and it seems like that really propels her to look for external validation. And in a way, I guess her trajectory is in a way subtle about finding her voice. I mean, we go into how she's not so shy in bookish in her head anymore, and she's out there in the open more, but there seems to be a subtleness into how she finds her activism. I guess my complaint about the book would be the first couple of chapters. I think it took a while for the book to find its footing. With the later chapters, like, we were very ensconced in one place in time, and then sometimes the narrative would take us back in time, but we always were going back to this present day event for whatever character is in question, and all of the backstory just sort of fortified the present day event. But I think there wasn't really a present day event in the beginning, because I don't know if Wolitzer really wanted to start with Greer in college. The whole college scenes always had this feeling of looking back, but there was no present day in those chapters. So it was a little, I don't know, it felt a little awkward to me, because there was this whole idea of, well, in the future, you know, she'll be with Faith and she'll have her own career trajectory, but it seemed like all of the emotional impetus was in college, but it didn't feel present. And anyway, that's sort of just, I don't know, it niggled at me narrative-wise as I was reading it, but then the novel did indeed find its footing. And then at the end, I think there were a couple of changing dynamics for Greer and Corey that conveniently happened at the same time, but I guess I'm getting a little nitpicky, I don't know, but overall, I do think this was a really strong novel and really lived up to my expectations. And now I'm on to what is probably my final read of the month. This is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. I'm going to continue to butcher this name, but it is a Soviet dystopian novel. So far, so good. As for what I hope to be reading first of all in May 2018, I figured I'll start with this book. I recently showed it in my book haul video. I got it from the library. It's part of my Jewish fiction published in 2017 list that I want to read. This is a book, Dinner at the Center of the Earth by Nathan Eclander. It's sort of, I think, sort of a meshing of genres, but also kind of literary, I think, about a Jewish-American Israeli spy who is being held in the Golan Heights, I think it is, or the Negev. It's in the Negev. So he falls out of favor, as it were, and it goes into a lot of politics that touches that region. I'm also continuing with my Sammy Rohr project, reading titles that were up for nomination for the Sammy Rohr Prize. It's a prize that awards an emerging author of Jewish interest in either fiction or nonfiction, and I'm trying to get through the nonfiction years now. And in May I'm trying to get through 2012, and I figured I'd start with this biography of Moses Montefiore, Jewish Liberator, Imperial Hero by Abigail Green. It's an interlibrary loan book, so I do have to return it in 3 weeks' time, and I'll read a little bit from the flap. Humanitarian, philanthropist, and campaigner for Jewish emancipation on a grand scale, Sir Moses Montefiore, born in 1784 and died in 1885, was the preeminent Jewish figure of the 19th century, and one of the first truly global celebrities. His story, told here in full for the first time, is a remarkable and illuminating tale of diplomacy and adventure. Abigail Green's sweeping biography follows Montefiore through the realms of court and ghetto, Tsar and Sultan, synagogue and stock exchange. Interweaving the public triumph of Montefiore's foreign missions with the private tragedy of his childless marriage, this book brings the diversity of 19th century Jewry brilliantly to life, from London to Jerusalem, Rome to St. Petersburg, Morocco to Istanbul. Here we see the origins of Zionism and the rise of international Jewish consciousness, the faltering birth of the international human rights, and the making of the modern Middle East, with the globalization and mobilization of religious identities now at the top of the political agenda. Montefiore's life story is as relevant as never before. Green's masterly biography bridges the East-West divide in modern Jewish history, presenting the transformation of Jewish life in Europe, the Middle East, and the New World as part of a single global phenomenon. As it reestablishes Montefiore's status as a major historical player, It also restores a significant chapter to the history of our modern world. So yeah, I really knew next to nothing, or know next to nothing about Montefiore, so I'm hoping to learn a lot more in an engaging way, hopefully. So that about covers it for me now. I'll be back tomorrow to review these 3 books. These are the 2010 Sammy Rohr contendees that I read in April, and I'm going to script and film my reviews tomorrow, so stay tuned. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.